CoffeePods, a podcast of the Acorn Christian Healing Foundation, exploring what's happening in the world through the lens of Christian healing.
Fantastic. We're back again, aren't we? I'm glad you're with me. You're like my regular sidekick now. It's always good to have an excuse to sit down and talk to you and have a podcast with you. I have my candle lit, which is sort of my spiritual encouragement as we talk, but you get yours in a different way, don't you? Doctor Who has a sonic screwdriver. So today we're going to be using the power of the sonic screwdriver to unite a broken world.
I have about 5 more sitting over there too. You haven't seen them all.
You are the only person I know with a collection of sonic screwdrivers.
We'll go back to the evolution of screwdriver this episode. How about that?
Ultimate nerd thing. I think that is fantastic.
Yeah.
For all the Doctor Who people that are listening, you have a kindred spirit here today in the group. So some people don't like Doctor Who. Some people can't live without Doctor Who. And the question that I'm going to pose today is, how do we find unity in a world that is so diverse? And where does the courage come from to hold on to differences and live in this kind of state of flux? I had somebody at church come up to me and she said, "I love watching the podcast. Can you do one on unity?" And I said, "Well, gosh, let me think about that." And then I went away and I found that it was actually harder than I thought about, because we have just finished the prayer for Christian unity, which is kind of this weird global initiative started in the early 90s. The brief history was these two folks they were Episcopalians, they later became Roman Catholics, and they actually started this movement to pray for Christian unity across denominations. I mean, it's not a really new idea. In Scotland in the 1700s, they were calling for unity, and the first Lambeth Conference in 1867 called for Anglicans to pray for unity. Unity is not a new idea, but perhaps it's an idea that the modern church and all of us need to kind of rediscover those words of John 17, that they may all be one. And so right here at the end of the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul, we always celebrate each year with this week where we try and actually do stuff to promote unity. So this podcast is kind of an answer to the call to promote unity. So here we are.
And talk about a call for unity. We can talk about the new certification for the new Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullally, who was the former Bishop of London. She had her certification service at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And you were there, right? You were at the cathedral. Is that right?
Yeah, I was sitting, in fact, I was sitting right in front of the guy who protested.
And that no person has appeared in opposition to the confirmation.
There was an objector in the middle of the service, and it was
What did he say?
Really quiet, and he kind of jumped up with his cane and shouted, "I object," and he stated a rehearsed sentence that he had, he knew exactly what he was going to say. And quickly security came and the ushers sort of showed him the door with a few other people that were with him. And it was a bit disruptive. I don't know that it was helpful. Don't know that it really made the point. It was kind of like the people standing in front of St. Paul's with their big giant signs basically saying that the Church of England was apostate and the harlots, and all the people come out in full force to protest anything they don't agree with. And so in the midst of the unity of St. Paul's Cathedral, you have all this disunity around it. Even in the middle of the church service, you have bishops up front who disagree with the ordination of women still, and they're standing right there behind the new Archbishop of Canterbury.
A little backstory. Sarah Mullally, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, is the 106th Archbishop of Canterbury, and out of all 106, she is the first woman in history to now hold the role. So all these protests, all these people being angry at this decision to appoint her, to call her even comes after, I don't even know how many years that is. Was that 500 years of almost 600 years of appointing archbishops? So it really is a change in tide for the Church of England, for the Anglican communion as a whole.
Yeah, it's 1,400 years of a church, and she's the first. And going back to St. Augustine, now many argue that she's not the 106th archbishop because they should start counting archbishops of Canterbury from Thomas Cranmer, from the English Reformation. But I disagree with that. I kind of think you go back to the beginning of the church in England, and you don't start counting at the point at which Henry VIII started the English church. But in any event, there's still division. There's still people who disagree. And certainly they're going to disagree about having a female in the highest office in the global Anglican communion. So it's, how in the heck do we find unity in this world? You know, the church world has its own diversity and disagreements, but the wider world is, you know, is just fraught with disagreements and people taking sides and things like that. You know, and I think, you know, my conversation with Heather at church, she has done missionary work in Malawi for her entire life. So, I mean, talk about a person who really has seen diversity in culture, diversity in theology, and yet she stays the course in helping bring healthcare to children and education to children and, you know, vaccinations to villages. I mean, it's wonderful. So she's living the gospel in a way that sort of challenges me to think how this podcast really, you know, I can do a better job of promoting unity in a crazy world.
And I think it's important to acknowledge the moment we're in. You can call it like a cultural moment. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see that things are pretty difficult, especially because of social media. People are polarized. People are full of suspicion. People, knowing it or not knowing it, live in echo chambers. Going back to Sarah Mullally quickly, before I move on from that, I'm on my TikTok. My first TikTok is rejoicing this great moment, this progressive moment. And then I think I get 2 videos into Sarah Mullally becoming the new archbishop, and then the guy jumps up from the back screaming and shouting his rehearsed nonsense, in my opinion. And so I found it's really fascinating, isn't it? It took 2 or 3 videos, and I'm on the inverse of that side of the event. So it didn't take very long, and I imagine a lot of people had the same experience.
Doesn't social media thrive on that tension between protesters and gorgeous occasions? It's like, why did Sky News spend so much time on the objector and so little time on the beauty of Sarah hugging the children in the gospel choir? You know,
you got to look at who owns Sky News as well. Same person who owns Fox, I believe. But there's lots of reasons for why certain media outlets focus. But I think the really interesting thing to talk about is the algorithm and how that farms interaction. But we can get into that later, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
You know, I met Desmond Tutu back in the mid-90s, and he was a wise guy who lived in a difficult time, and I've read a lot of stuff he's written, and one of my favorite Tutu quotes, he actually wrote, "My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human when we're together." And so this really is a foundational quote about how we find our way to being together. And so today I'm really am posing this question, just kind of like Tutu would be a living example of this question. How do we find unity? What does unity actually mean? And I thought, because this week I was thinking about this, what's the difference between unity, which means belonging to something, and unanimity, which means we all agree? And so unity is something that it sort of invites communion, coming together, whereas unanimity demands like agreement. We got to all be on the same page. We've got to agree on everything. And
we have to be unanimous to have unity? That's wow. What a
but I'm thinking that the problem is so many people think unanimity is what is necessary in the world, and so what they do then is beat down people who believe differently or think differently. And yet I think we're being called today to find greater places of unity, which the Archbishop of York and his charge to Archbishop Sarah, his charge was fantastic because he talked about Sarah being herself, but also finding ways to make things wider and more accessible to all so that love can find new ways in. And I found it beautiful.
Can I throw a movie reference at you?
Yeah, come on. I need to go to a movie. I haven't been to the movie in a long time.
You got to. I went and saw Avatar not too long ago, probably a month ago now. And then I saw this movie called Father, Mother, Brother, Sister, or something like that. I can't remember the name. And so very different movies.
Which Avatar did you go see?
Avatar, yeah. The Avatar I went and saw was the latest one, which was Ash and Fire, I think. The Fire one. But I was going to say is I watched that in the cinema with my partner, and then we were like, we got to go and watch the first two again. What the heck? What was that? It's such an epic. But for anyone that doesn't know, Avatar is a story of a man who goes to this planet named Pandora. He's paralyzed because his brother died. He takes his brother's place in this science research program where he's actually placed inside the native alien species on this planet who are giant blue creatures, beautiful. Through that, he discovers that these people called the Na'vi, these natives, have this beautiful faith and religion, and everything's interconnected with the planet. And actually, the god of the planet is just Yahweh with the letters changed around.
Awa.
Awa. Yep, so you know.
Awa. See, I know a little bit.
Oh gosh, it's
the tree.
Very deep and
it's
rich
like a giant tree, the lighted tree that Sigourney Weaver gets sucked up
into in the first one. I don't want to spoil it for you, but they find there's different climates, there's different ways to connect to AWA, so it's not just a tree.
All right, I've got to go and find the religious undertone.
But I'll put a bow on it to make sense of why I'm mentioning this. Is we're talking about unity, and we're talking about, do we all have to agree to have unity? And the beautiful thing about this story is the Na'vi are very different. Each tribe is vastly different, and they are tribal, and they know that.
Yeah.
But they come together in this common cause because the humans have come and they're threatening.
Yeah, because some fly and some climb trees and some ride flying birds and stuff. I mean, they're all very, very different.
Yeah, water, gifted, fire. Yep.
Okay.
So there's a sense of unity there, which I really appreciate.
Okay, so you gave me your movie. I'm going to give you one of my favorites. Boy, I've always loved the story of the T.C. Williams high school football team from the 70s called Remember the Titans. There's a wonderful scene where they go away to their preseason training camp, and the coach is trying to find a way to get them to actually play together, to trust each other. And it's a story of racism and integration, where a school is integrated and white players and black players have to come together to play on this team. And it's a true story about the historic Remember the Titans quest to the state championship under Coach Boone and Coach Yost. And there's this one particular scene where they're playing late at night, and I've talked to some of the players from that team, and they say this is all fiction, but it's lovely historical fiction where they make up a movie, and you just want to believe that it happened just like it showed on the movie. But there's this one scene where they make a tackle and they criticize, and through the criticism, the two linebackers, the great Gary Bertier, who was a real person, and he basically criticizes his teammate, and then his teammate suddenly says strong side, left side. So the two linebackers, the left and right linebackers, suddenly are seen by this diverse team of white and black kids as being united. That it's more important that we are united as defensive players who are tough than it is for us to stay with our racial groupings. And it was like the crack in the veneer begins to appear in this wonderful movie that begins to play out. And, and then you even have the scene, one of my favorite scenes is when the real heavy set lineman, who is now like this fit bodybuilder looking guy, the guy who was the big offensive tackle, he starts singing with Rev in the locker room. And so again, taking the stereotype, and he begins singing this religious song with Rev in a sort of church way. They're celebrating the diversity that's within the team. And then something happens within this team. And a personal aside, I was a part of the funeral many moons ago. Had the wife of the linebacker of the Remember the Titans team was a member of my church, and his name was Mike Hobson. And his funeral was one of the most amazing things because the whole team came. And the coaches came to the team, and the speeches that were given, the eulogies offered, and the most powerful moment was when Petey, who was the running back of the great Remember the Titans team, he's the janitor at T.C. Williams High School. He actually stayed at TC and has been the janitor there for years and years. I don't know what he's doing now, but he got up and gave the testimony of the semifinal game where their linebacker on the other team was destroying them, and Petey couldn't get a break, and coach adjusted at halftime, as you know how this works in a football game, and the coach told Mike Hobson to forget about his assignments. And every play, he said he wanted him to find the middle linebacker no matter what the play was. He said, come off the line of scrimmage, find the linebacker, and put him on his back. And Petey actually rushed for over 200 yards in the second half of that game, and they won the game big. And Petey said in the eulogy, he said the next day in the newspaper in Alexandria, Virginia, his picture was on the front of the paper. And he said, but the real hero of that game was Big Mike. And there we were with this massive casket and Mike's jersey and all the flowers and all the football players. And I thought, it's a story of doing things sacrificially for the good of your brother, of your teammate. How do we make the world better? We find a way to go against the things that maybe we think we should do, and we do the things that are right. So anyway, that I love that movie because every time I watch it, I see this possibility of a world filled with diverse people who can work together and move in a common direction for the common good.
Right. Unity. Yeah. I mean, I need to talking about a film I need to watch again. You do Avatar, I'll do Remember the Titans. I mean,
Yeah,
trade-off.
I think so.
Yeah.
And, the great Brene Brown, I don't know if you've bumped into her. She's kind of a lot of seminary trained people tend to read Brene Brown stuff, but she said one time, people are really hard to hate when we're close up. And then she said, we need to move in. So when you think about that, the closer we get to other people, and I found this really true when I worked as a hospital chaplain for years and years, the closer I get to patients, the harder it is for me to find, to not love them. I may not like some of the stuff that I bump into along that journey, but deep down, I find their humanity, and I find it really easy to hate even the most unlovable people when I'm really close to them, close to their hearts, I guess I should say.
So what is it that binds us? Remember the Titans is a great example, I think, because there's all these layers of society and culture and expectation coming into that story, and then defying all of that, they find unity. How and why? And why is it that we struggle today to find unity?
Yeah, a lot of movies that are successful movies are about belonging and purpose. And so what happens then is the director of these movies, they show on screen an insecurity in humanity and a longing to belong. And then they show the resolution of that longing being played out it's kind of like the fairy tale where you get the happily ever after on the screen, where they go, I am now belonging, I'm now a part, and all is well because I'm loved and I love others. And maybe that's why it works on the silver screen, and that's why sometimes they change the endings of real life stories to make them different, because it's sometimes it's harder to see the true trajectory of a story than it is the Disney happily ever after.
Yeah, and I think often in movies, to wrap up my thought on movie world, is they often give a common enemy or a common cause, and not necessarily a positive common cause.
Yeah.
Remember the Titans is an exception in a kind of sort of way. kind of, because they all want to win a state championship. So that's the common cause, I guess. But there's
Yeah.
also this racial unity happening.
And
But
the racism is still there. I mean, the
yeah,
thing is, all these years later, people talk about the great teams of the 70s, and yet there is still division in society. You can walk down the streets of Alexandria, Virginia, and you will still have that racism which exists beneath the surface, and that animosity and the anger and the ghettoization of society, where you have people living in groups that are kind of racially segregated. And so we've moved a long way, but we still have a long way to go. I think, there's
I
still,
hope we don't all need an enemy to find unity like the Na'vi did.
yeah. But I mean, there is still a lot of energy and resources. People spend time on figuring out who belongs. Who's in and who's out. There's a Christianity today that is just so transfixed with this obsession of trying to figure out who's going to get into heaven and who's not going to get into heaven. And so the whole motivation for mission is not to make people's lives better and to bring the kingdom of God into reality for the poor, but instead it's to take the poor person and tell them about Jesus and get them saved. And then you move along to the next mission, and then the hope. And I think, wait a minute, don't we stick around and make sure they have bread? Why can't we have the theology and the mission and the transformation and the unity piece? We're so obsessed with the theology piece that sometimes we lose the humanity of people. And so that's when I say we've shifted into a land of unanimity, because we want everybody to share our theology, or the fancy word is our soteriology, how we get saved. And so we spend all our energy making sure that everybody knows this is how we get saved. And this is why the Bible tells us that this is how we keep from going to hell when we die. And that push of people changes the way they see the world around them, because they then see all the people around them as lost sinners, not as beloved neighbors. I mean, again, that's controversial. And some people will take issue. They'll hear this podcast and they'll say, "Oh, they're promoting, apostate teaching, and they need to get back to the Bible." And I'm like, no, I think the Beatitudes in the Bible are really where we start to learn how to be united and how to love each other, because that's where we find our blessedness.
You know what doesn't help? The people you just described, these made-up situation of someone saying, well, I don't like what you're saying on that Acorn podcast. I think what really doesn't help is the climate we're living in, that's like it would be a small fire that would go out by itself, but with social media just rages on eternally at this point, it feels like. I mean, you said recently, I'm pretty sure you said this, that we curate our feeds to avoid discomfort and then wonder why
Sure.
we can't handle disagreement. But then it goes the other way too. We also sometimes curate our feeds to be outrage cycles and then wonder why we're so frustrated with the world.
Explain that to me, because I know that stuff shows up on my phone uninvited, and it feels like I'm being manipulated.
Well, there's people who make the algorithm. The algorithm didn't just pop up. It's kind of a buzzword now, algorithm. There's a group of people, usually toward the top of the food chain of a company.
Okay.
There's lots of social media companies. The people who own the companies hire people that hire people to make these.
So it's a tool.
algorithms.
It's like a machine designed for a purpose.
Imagine an industrial revolution aged machine making some product just in your head right now, just
Makes
like
an
that.
engine. Makes an engine to drive a car.
Right. It's like a factory line.
Okay.
These software engineers can go in and tweak this algorithm and fine tune it in whatever direction to produce whatever they want. So
Okay.
if they want to maximize impressions, eyeballs seeing a post, they can. If they want to mobilize a population, they can. So sometimes, not all the time, but I would say sometimes when we see things that make us feel uncomfortable or confused, sometimes it's intentionally placed in front of you, maybe to do the exact thing that you're feeling.
So, I'm thinking, if bad people have access to this tool, this machine, then what they can do is manipulate through algorithms an entire population into a kind of rage baiting, they put stuff in front of people that's divisive and undermines the very truth in the world. And so they say fake news, fake news, fake news. And what that does is it means that everybody then looks suspiciously at reality. So suddenly it's like George Orwell or something. This is like
he's not
1984.
the best example. He's not the best example to use, but I know I've seen the quotes circulating because of the algorithm online. So people have
But it does feel like the truth is no longer the truth and the lie is the truth, and that people are so lost in the lie that the world feels so divided, and we're not united because nobody really knows which rock in the stream is not wobbling, because we're being told all the time on our phones that all the rocks are wobbling. And so you have no confidence to step. And so you just kind of stay put and you wait for the water to stop rushing. And I think that fear and that posture is, it goes directly against the whole, the idea in Ephesians 4 that, that we should make every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Here we are trying to be countercultural in a way. And,
Okay.
and I don't know where we go with that, because the world seems to be going in the opposite direction of unity and peace.
I'm not trying to revolutionize anyone here or even radicalize unless it's toward Jesus, but why would ultra powerful, ultra wealthy people be trying to divide us? If they are, I'm not saying they are, but if they are, why would they be? I mean, that's the question you posed, and I'm going to push that again, because that's the thing. It's a really important one. Why would people who have everything want to control everything?
I think the answer is deeply embedded in human nature. And I would say the reason you have people who are pushing back are because they want to maintain their power, they want to maintain their influence, and they want to stay rich.
I think, the analogy of algorithm as a machine making a product, I think the system we live in the Western part of the world, is doing what it's intended to do. That's my opinion. But another movie reference I'll throw at you, to kind of talk about unity and backstep from World of Billionaires and potential corruption. Wow, that sounded really great.
Let me guess, it's going to be your favorite movie of all time.
I mean, I already talked about Avatar, so I have to keep the ball rolling on crazy films. So, Lord of the Rings.
Of course it's Lord of the Rings.
Mouse pad in front of me is the map of Middle Earth, by the way. I thought I'd share that as well. So I can actually look as I talk about it.
Lauterbrunnen this past summer, so you saw Tolkien's inspiration. So it's going to be on your mind forever now.
Oh, it truly. I think what Lord of the Rings shows, it shows so many things, but I'm going to focus on our topic. It shows that unity is a gift. And a kind of an inexplicable gift, really. It's not something that they...
Unity is a gift.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think that's what the film, one of the things the film shares.
I think it is. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I mean, there's lots of things you can take away from Lord of the Rings, lots of directions you can go, but I think there's Bilbo, Frodo, Gandalf, Aragorn, none of them sat down and said, this is how we're going to unify ourselves. They lived a life and they struggled together. And that experience brought them closer. So I think it goes back to the quote you said just now, that as they got closer to each other, they were more unified with each other. So their
fellowship is united not by sameness, but by a shared sense of purpose. And I think that's so important because, if the world is divided and split and arguing, then the church is not going to be immune. The church is going to be divided and fighting and arguing. And so what do you do with the disagreements and the infighting and the posturing and the politics, which are everywhere? And, lots of people are really put off right now by what they're seeing amongst those who are called faithful. I mean, right now, people are kind of nasty toward bishops. They're saying really horrible things about the bishops in the Anglican Church and about leaders in the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, anybody that has political power in a religious organization seems to have a target on their back.
I think from a young person's perspective, I have a high degree of trust in the system, in bishops, and people in leadership. But I think, have to be honest, I also do have a low degree of suspicion, especially since in recent months there's been scandal and things coming out of the Church of England specifically that I'm aware of. But it is tough, I think, to remain faithful or remain trusting in a system that you can see has broken promises or hidden their true face.
Yeah. It didn't Gandhi say something like, I love your Christ, but it's your Christians I find most difficult, or something like that?
Yeah, isn't that a dagger? Yeah.
But there again, it shows that if we were living the message of the gospel and embracing the call of the Beatitudes, then there's nobody on earth, whatever their religious persuasion, or even if they're just a secular humanist, there's no one that would find us detestable, that they couldn't look at us and say, I can't be united with you. Because if you can disagree with somebody and still love them, it means you can be united with them. It doesn't compromise you to let someone in your circle of love. It might compromise them because they're constantly having to ask themselves about their own sense of identity and purpose. But I think it's important that we don't sacrifice our call to be radical lovers of others because the world is telling us something different. So I think it's important to acknowledge the struggles. I realize that a new Archbishop of Canterbury who is a woman, it's going to be a struggle for some people. I had tea with her a few weeks ago, and I think she's great. She's real. She's approachable. She's got the pastoral heart of a good nurse and the sensibility of a chief executive. She cares. I think you want caring and faithfulness in your leadership, and she's got that. But she's going to be attacked. There's no question. And there's going to be ongoing division over the ministry of women, not just Sarah Mullally, but women priests up and down the land in the Anglican Church and around the world are still going to face an indictment from people who don't accept women's ministry. And I think that's a problem. I think perhaps we have reached a point in the church where, and I'll probably get hate mail for this, but we've reached a point in the church where Anglicans need to embrace women in all their fullness in church leadership, and those who don't need to find another pasture where they can flourish. The Roman Catholic Church has pretty much put a stake in the ground and said they're not ordaining women. And so there's a place for people to exercise ministry because the ordinariate is an option for people. But I think the Anglican Church holding these things together and pretending that that is somehow unity, I think is a mistake in the long run, because I think that is it's kind of letting people have their cake and eat it too. They can be discriminatory and yet they still get to sit at the table. And I think I think long term there's a problem with that, because, if unity requires unanimity, then the church is never going to be united. But if unity can be something different, I make room for you and you make room for me, that's a different kind of unity. But it doesn't undermine, imagine, if you will, people were protesting because the new Archbishop of Canterbury was black-skinned human being. And because of the darker skin, there were a group of people that says, we don't recognize the validity of the ordination of black people. And you would say, what? Are you actually kidding me? Are you serious? On the grounds of what? Well, they're black.
Well,
They're descendants of slaves.
150 years ago, this would have happened, likely.
Yes. And can you imagine the outrage if people said, well, we just need to tolerate those who don't accept the ministry of black people? I mean, that is kind of what happened in the Civil War South in America. But here we are all these years later, and you literally have a group of people who are doing the same level of discriminatory behavior and online nastiness toward women, all women. And we haven't even gone into things like homosexuality and things like that, which are other issues where discrimination happens, but just on the basis of being a woman, just a woman. You are a woman created by God, and you are told by all of these men that you are not valid, that there is an invalidity in you. And how can you be united when you continue to hold a belief system that is discriminatory at its core?
I like the idea that at St. John's Waterloo, they really, really do a good job of promoting this. Unity is not necessarily the word they use, because unity, it's like a fence you build around your church, and you have to fit through the gate that they've built. A lot of people are going to feel like they bounce right off. A better approach, I think, is the idea of inclusion. It's, you don't have to agree with us, but you are welcome under our house rules into our house. I think that's a better approach, rather than bending the rules or making an exception to get people within the Church of England is what we're talking about.
There are all sorts of examples in the Bible where people disagreed. They disagreed about theology. They disagreed about heresy, about the rules and regulations, about how the old covenant applied to the new day, eating rules, the clothing rules, all sorts of things. And they found a way to persevere and make it through. And they disagreed with other people. It's like I studied John Wesley back in the early, and his journals are quite provocative because he was quite conservative, very much a man trying to reform the Church of England all those years ago. And he asked this question, this provocative question. He said, "Though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike? May we not love alike?" And I thought, gosh, that's a good question, because we can think all sorts of things, and have different ideas and different theological understandings about things. But when it comes to loving other people, can't we love alike? Can't we be lovers of others in the same way, or must our love look differently? And that's when love starts to be persuasive love and manipulative love, rather than being genuine, selfless love. It's a different kind of love.
What does that look like? Random question. Hang on with me for a sec. What's the biggest concert you've ever been to?
My gosh.
Yeah.
I have to think about that. I'm not sure, because
I can tell you mine
in the
while you're
80s,
thinking.
I went to see 38 Special and Loverboy, and you probably don't even know who they are.
Well, the biggest one I've gone to, and it was kind of a public thing, was MLK Day, MLK Junior Day,
Of course.
2008, right? It was 2008.
Seeing you too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the day before Barack Obama's inauguration, his first term, and had to be, what, 500,000? I was young.
It's the biggest thing I've ever attended to. I was right there with you. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was unbelievable.
I made your sister very angry because I started dancing. I could not control myself, and I began dancing like a crazy man in the crowd because U2 was singing.
There were so many people and so large that there was probably a 5-second delay from the instruments being strummed to us hearing it.
And you could see the screen, the images on the screen were like on a delay. And we were at the Washington Monument, but we were looking down the reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial. And we saw James Taylor, and we saw the great Pete Seeger with his banjo.
Playing,
singing "This Land Is Your Land." And there we are with a black president with his family standing on the spot where Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream."
And remember, just like Sarah Mullally and the argument you made, people were mad that he was a dark-skinned man and not white at the time.
Absolutely.
But what I'm getting at is, what does love look like? What does unity look like? My brain jumps to that, and then I think about my faith, and imagine a Christian movement like that, where Jesus is on stage, And when we have come to this place, a place of unity, because Jesus is on stage, not our own ego or something.
It's about love. It's about harmony. It's about beauty. It's not about judgment. It's not about politics, even though that day was about politics. It was really weird because it stopped being Democrat and Republican. It was a moment of goodness for humanity. It was patriotic. There was a whole lot of American flags waving and stuff.
Yeah.
But there was something deeper in that it made me think of the Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. There were so many moments. Of course, I was scared because the crowd was so big. I was worried about your health and safety. I don't know if you remember, we ended up going over toward the trees to get off to the side because I was worried some fool would do something and make a noise or set a firecracker off. And I mean, they had guns on the cars on the Washington Monument, and I was kind of scared for your safety, even though we did have a fantastic time. I mean, listening to Tom Hanks narrate something, followed by James Taylor, followed by U2, and the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington. I mean, it was just one thing after another. It was glorious, because it was all about celebrating life and love and possibility and celebrating a dream
and
that was
diversity,
coming to fruition.
celebrating differences held together, which I think is a big piece of finding unity.
So how do we, I guess what we've gone around the circle here today. We're not talking about how we eliminate differences, but how do we hold those differences faithfully? At what point are the differences tolerated and okay? I guess when someone else's difference violates my freedom to be who I am, then I guess that's where I would draw the line, and it starts ceasing to feel like love when your repulsion of me forces me to feel less than free and human. Then it doesn't really seem like unity to me.
What if difference is not a problem to solve, but a gift to receive? And I added can because it often isn't a gift, but I think it can be. I think difference can be.
Yeah.
Diversity is a good thing.
You might think I'm crazy because a lot of times I go to theology to try and make sense of the world. And, the Trinitarian model is actually a pretty cool place to start when we talk about unity and diversity. Because this idea that within the heart of God who created the universe is this Father, Son, Holy Spirit, creator, redeemer, sustainer, this threefold model of divine presence in the universe, that you have a model of diversity working beautifully in what Dr. Paul Fittis, one of my doctrine professors many years ago at Regent's Park in Oxford, talked about the divine dance, or the fancy word was divine perichoresis, that you have the interpenetrating nature of the love of God, that God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are engaged in this dance, this movement, and that we're called to enter into that diversity. Well, if the world models that, then we then learn to dance with our neighbor. It's like the world needs to be engaged in one big giant dance party to make the world a better place. Because if you're dancing with your neighbor, you can't be fighting with them.
Yeah, and I think I feel called to ask questions like: is the system we live in, is it, and will it be the best system to drive us in the direction of unity as a people, as a race, humans? And I'm not sure, but I think that there's lots of questions to ask, and that's kind of toward the top of my list.
Yeah. But I think we live in a world where people see differences as problematic. They don't really see differences as gifts, because you're talking to people today that are going to listen to this and they're going to go, I don't think being different's a gift. I think we should all try. It's the monochrome argument where we all need to figure out who we want to model our lives after, and then pursue this person who in our career path has been successful, whatever that means. And then you model everything after the 12 steps of a successful person. And, I think it's like the movie Inside Out, which I referenced. I talked about the movie Inside Out at the Academy in fact, I think the last two ones I've used a video clip. It shows this wonderful dance of emotions within a human being. It's an animated movie, which is actually absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's
But
great.
it shows all these emotions working together almost like a great dance. And so it gives you the ability to go, oh, so this is the kind of difference that we could celebrate, that we don't have to say the important thing. The message from Inside Out is that we must learn to kill these emotions, that we must never have these emotions. Sadness has no place. But see, that's not what the movie tells us. It actually shows us the way that the dance and the balance can exist within the human mind so that a person can find healthiness and a happy way to live in a kind of crazy world.
Yeah, yeah, and it kind of leads me on to think, how do we practice unity in our daily life?
It's tough. It's tough. I think,
Stuff.
in 1990, we had Maya Angelou, the great poet. She came to Duke University to speak, and she was actually pretty amazing, very vivacious, came in her big bus. And one of the quotes that she said when she spoke that stuck with me, she stood up and said, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." And I kept thinking about that over and over again. If you really stop and think, actually, all the people around you, we're actually much more alike than we are unalike. And if we embrace that as true, then we have to live in a slightly different way because we cut ourselves a lot of slack every day. I mean, I think when you look in the mirror in the morning, you cut yourself a whole lot of slack for all the things you do wrong and the things the thoughts you have and the things you wish you had done better, the things done and the things left undone from the prayer book that we ask forgiveness for in the daily office. But if we're giving our neighbor that same space, then isn't that going to make the world a better place?
I think so. I think so. There's lots of things I can think that I've experienced or done that have helped me in pursuing this idea of unity. A funny story, I think it was Reverend Giles Goddard at St. John's Waterloo. I just mentioned them, so that's why it's in my head. And the first time I walked through, I met him, I had this one-liner I would give people that asked about my accent. And so I assumed he was going to ask about my accent when I met him. And I said, "Oh, I know I don't sound English." And he goes, "What does that sound like? What does English sound like?"
What a great question.
And then I stopped and went, "Holy crap, he has resisted the stereotype and thrown it back at me." He just went, "Look at the stereotype that you're carrying."
There you go.
And
There
so
you
I
go.
think that is one of many great experiences I've had where I see my own prejudice laid out in front of me for me to analyze.
Good on
yeah,
Giles. Another good priest in the Church of England who's making
such a
difference.
nice guy.
Yeah.
Him and his husband.
That's
Such nice
great.
people.
That's great. So let's kind of wrap it up with, let's talk about unity. You mentioned unity. Where do we go with this this idea of unity? Where does it take you?
Where does it take me? It kind of it turns me into a bit of an activist in a way, to be honest. It revs my engine and gets me going. Makes me want to go out in the world and try to make a difference. But I think I'm left with the question of how best to do that, because I feel a bit put off when I take a step back and look at the world. It's quite a task. And as a Christian, what is it I can do?
Let me ask you a question. Tell me, what is this practicing unity thing? What does that look like to you? What does it mean to you? How does it change the way you live and react to people around you?
Well, I think practicing unity, it's about holding convictions and trying to stay humble. A hard one, because this can get lost in your daily life, is prayer, and staying true to the power of prayer in your life. There seems to be two types of prayer I've heard in my life. There's the prayer at somebody or for somebody, and there's a prayer against somebody. And there's a big difference there. So supporting, uplifting others in prayer, praying for their best, praying for their healing, and then actively praying against the best for somebody. So prayer is an important one. What about you? What do you think are some ways we can practice unity?
I don't know. I mean, I like to think that sort of John 17 makes a lot of sense, that Jesus prayed for a unity so that the world may believe, that our unity is actually something that is helping a faithless world to find faith and purpose, and that unity is kind of like holiness, and it's not passive. It's learning how to really lean into relationships with other people and to cultivate a deep curiosity in the world around us. And there are times when I'm really bad at it. There are times when I'm bored and don't really want to exert the effort to learn about other people. But it's a spiritual discipline to actually try and remain united with others. It's much easier to throw rocks, to throw accusations, to throw theology, to throw scripture. Much easier. And I would say the heavy weight is to actually listen to somebody else's reality, to love them, to embrace the diversity that's there, even if you disagree with it. And that's the hard part, because I think that when we bump into something we really disagree with, even my comments about the ordination of women and women's ministry, even when we bump into people who hold these very strong views, it's easy to be intolerant of them. And I kind of have done that today. But for me, there kind of certain lines that I just don't believe should not be crossed. It's the intolerance of the Jews in Nazi Germany. I wouldn't tolerate it. I wouldn't tolerate a belief system that makes the marginalization of Jewish people anything but unacceptable. So that's kind of where I am at the moment. But we all can grow and we all can learn.
So I guess two questions. Do we cling to being the same as each other, or trying to make everyone the same as us? Or do we choose unity?
Clinging to unanimity is to choose to remain small, to remain small-minded, remain potentially isolated or on your little island with your fellow believers who share all the same views as you. And I think that's a sad compromise in life. A lot of people will choose that, and they say, well, I live on my little island and I watch my news channels and I watch my preacher and I believe in the Bible the way he teaches. So they live in a very vacuum kind of existence. And I think unity is saying, I'm going to stay in the middle of the melting pot and I'm going to remain vulnerable and exposed to the possibility of hearing things and seeing people and meeting ideas that I never dreamed were there.
It sounds a bit messy.
I think it can be really messy, especially when somebody shows up one day with their kid and they tell you, my daughter Felicia was born Tom, and 5 years ago, Tom transitioned to become Felicia. And you're sitting there going, wait a minute, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about this trans stuff. And so there's something in our DNA from our childhood where we've been preconditioned to believe certain things about human sexuality and about gender. And then suddenly we sit down with their parents who maybe we've known for years, and we say, tell me, what was this like for Felicia's journey? Tell me, what was it like to be the father of Felicia? And then suddenly you go, holy cow, that's amazing. And isn't Felicia lovely? I mean, that's the whole point for me. It's like the surprise and the revelation of the normalcy. Because you say, well, gosh, if Felicia was my daughter, I'd be so proud of her. What a hard journey she's had. And isn't it awful that there are still people in the world that are mean to her, that are trying to worry about where she goes to the bathroom and stuff like that. And so, again, unity versus unanimity, for me, seems like such a better place. Such when we talk about healing, to make the world a more wholesome, whole place for everybody to thrive, kind of lancing the boil of unanimity, I think, is vital for the Christian church, and that we embrace this new unity that rises up and is messy and glorious and
So
colorful.
what was you're good with quotes, the Martin Luther King quote where he said, I only know the first half, we must learn to live together, something, something, something.
As brothers and sisters, or we perish together as fools.
Perish together as fools. That's right.
And it's
isn't that
true.
it? Yeah.
It's so true. Every day is a challenge to make a choice about whether we're going to make it or whether we're not going to make it. And I think we have to choose the victory. You know, that's a big thing, choosing the victory that comes in living together with our brothers and sisters, all of them. And that seems a fantastic quote. You know, here we are at the end of the week of prayer for Christian unity in the world, and we're reminded the importance of unity at a time when things are so divided and people are angry and they're marching in the streets and there's militarization in some corners of the world and there's fighting and bombing, and it just seems to me that we've got to get back to a place of finding love and unity.
I think we need to move forward into it. There is no going back.
No.
The great quote, there is no going back with Jesus. I agree with that we have to move forward beyond where we are.
Yeah. But I think that unity begins when we start exhibiting the courage to stay in the difficult places, when we listen in the hard conversations, and when we love in the relationships with folks that seem kind of unlovable. And then ultimately, when we find a way to walk together as fellow human beings in this world. And life is short. Life is so short, and if we can't figure this stuff out, we're going to be old, miserable people.
What do you choose today?
There's no chance in finding unanimity. I think it's a myth. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to embrace the rainbow reality of the world. In fact, I've got this new hat that was knitted for me, and I'm going to embrace the rainbow existence. The colors of the rainbow are vibrant and radiant. They're like the flowers in the field. They're like the leaves in the tree. And I think God created the world with all of this color. And I think today is a fantastic day to celebrate the color, embrace the diversity of the world, and to be people who believe in unity. And I'll even wear my crazy hat. See, look at that. I'm embracing the unity. Woo, let's go.
I gotta end the episode with at least two of these.
We get the sonic screwdriver, the candle, and the rainbow hat.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And
all right, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe.